Happy Earth Day. We are celebrating Creation Care Sunday, as we often do, so often after Easter, happening right after Easter, which is delightful. Earth Day was instituted in 1970 to remind us that the creation is precious and that we need to be more careful with it. And so I think it's fitting that we have a resurrection story today. You're going to get them for the next few weeks in this season of Easter. And in this resurrection story, as Jesus appears in other resurrection stories, he appears as a wounded man. Why would a resurrected divine walking around Jesus still have wounds on him? Now, he's not still hurting. He's not bleeding. He's not in pain. But he bears the wounds so much so that you can put your hand in it or put your finger in the wound. And Thomas needs more proof before he's going to believe. It's wondering to me, this is not the only time when Jesus appears wounded. He also appears hungry. He asks, do you have something to eat in other ones? Or he cooks fish for the disciples. He's eating. He's a real walking around human being, except not in pain anymore after the torturous day he'd had 3 days before. So interesting, right? But this is not the only time that the Christ has been in our midst. And so I want to focus today on another way of thinking of Christ besides the risen Jesus, the Jesus of Nazareth, who rose and walked around for 50 days before he ascended into heaven. There has for a long time, since the 3rd or 4th century in Christianity, been a notion of the Christ always existing, the Christ being the love that God engenders for all of creation, love itself, since the beginning of time. The most obvious scriptural reflection that we use to prove this is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Well, Jesus is known as the Word. But in the understandings of Celtic Christianity, and later repeated in Franciscan Christianity and many other iterations of Christian thought, Christ, that is the sending forth of God to the world, is present in all of creation, every atom of creation, every rock, every tree, every bit of dirt, every bird, every snail, everything in all of creation. And that the manifestation of Jesus is the personification of the Christ, that God sent the Christ in the form of the human being for us so that we could have the experience we've had of Jesus, healing us, speaking to us, modeling for us, forming disciples. But basically, the notion of the cosmic Christ comes from the 3rd or 4th century. It got shot down by Augustine of Hippo, the famous theologian, among other people, because Augustine, who felt bad about his earlier life, really wanted to focus on the evil demon seed that is in all humanity and our need for Jesus to die for us on the cross to expiate our sin, to take on the penalty of our sin. But actually, the much earlier thought that was very prevalent in Christianity is that Jesus was sent as love, just as everything that God created was good and God loved it. So, take the creation story. In the beginning, right, God created the heavens and the earth, and then God creates plants, species, waters, skies, and then finally human beings. And after every creation, it says, and God saw that it was good, or said that it was good, including us. Good. Having some problems with it now and then, but created good. So, Celtic spirituality and Franciscan spirituality teaches that everything, every breath of air we have, that all of that is also the Christ, in addition to Jesus Christ. So it's easy to see how creation, it's not just us, that it is the whole world. There's another resurrection story going on today in the reading of Ezekiel. And just so you know, the readings today, except for the gospel, are ones appointed for a creation care service. So that's why you're hearing about the water and the trees and so on. Yay, finally, they don't normally have that for us to read. In that reading from Ezekiel, God is talking through Ezekiel about the temple that he's building with water flowing out of the temple on all sides. And that temple is going to the water is going to clean the waterways and flow all the way to the sea. But God says we're going to leave swamps, and we're not going to have the fresh water go through there because we need the swamp for salt. So leave that for some parts of creation. We need the salt. Leave the fresh water for the fresh fish, which everybody else can eat. And then along the waterways, notice it said fish of many different types. So God's celebrating diversity of species. And trees of many types with many good things to eat. Doesn't it sound like the Garden of Eden again? God is recreating it in the book of Ezekiel. God is resurrecting creation, saying, I'm going to get out the brackish water, I'm cleaning it with fresh water, but speaking lovingly, caringly, and protectively about waterways, about trees, about fish. Now, you could say that all of this Celtic Franciscan spirituality is just for the birds. And I would say exactly, literally, for the birds. We have several environmental concerns, one of them being, and the Canadians are really worried about this because they love to count birds, the bird species, the sheer number of birds as well as bird species that are in North America are declining at a frighteningly rapid rate. They're very worried about the number of birds going away. But I want to talk about water. You might say, oh, this is namby-pamby, bleeding liberals thinking. Ha! Back in 1970, there was a lawyer named Christopher Stone. He's the son of the novelist Irving Stone. And he was teaching law school at either USC or UCLA, and his law students were bored. So he came up with the idea of the legal rights of inanimate objects. He was thinking of trees and waterways, lakes, rivers, and so on. And you might think that sounds strange, but there had already been court cases, like somebody was arguing for an elephant that was being mistreated at the Bronx Zoo, so it was, Jumbo the elephant against the city of New York or whatever. And bird species had already successfully lobbied against some city in Northern California to save the bird species on behalf, somebody brought a lawsuit on behalf of the birds. So already we had established that animals have rights. And everybody said to him, you're crazy. But the woman writing this article that I read, which is in, of course, the April 18th version of the New Yorker, said that he said to them, anytime a new group needs rights, it is done in the courts. Women had no legal rights. Children had no legal rights. Black people, American Indians, had no legal rights in the United States until somebody went to a court and said they deserve the same thing that other people who have human and civil rights have. They should have the exact same rights. It's already happened for animals. Why not for waterways? Well, at the time, the Disney Corporation wanted to build a ski resort at a place called Mineral King, which is in the Sequoia National Forest, and they had to create big access roads and cut down some of the sequoias to do it. The Sierra Club brought a lawsuit against Disney Corporation, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, where William Douglas, who was one of the Supreme Court justices, wrote a dissenting opinion because Sierra Club lost against Disney in that court case. And he wrote, this is what he wrote, when people were arguing that water can't be a person in the court, you can't argue for it. He said, a corporation is a person, so it should be as respects valleys, alpine meadows, rivers, lakes, estuaries, beaches, ridges, groves of trees, swampland, or even air that feels the destructive pressures of modern technology and modern life. That was written in 1971. It's considered one of the most famous dissents in the Supreme Court's history. All right, now let's fast forward to the present day. Name a state, and you're going to name one of two. We already did this at the 8 a.m. Name a state that you would consider one of the most conservative, the least likely state in the Union to grant rights to a rock or a tree or a river. Florida. Everyone yells Texas first, but it's Florida. It's one of the two. Florida. Would you really consider Florida, where there's vast developments of housing all around Orlando, Florida, would you consider Florida a place to grant legal rights to a lake? Well, I'll tell you what happened. There's a lake called Lake Mary Jane. I was reading this on the plane. I've read this 3 times now. There's a lake called Lake Mary Jane in central Florida. It's near Orlando. It's in an area that was once given over to wetlands. That means it is no longer given over to wetlands. To the north, notice, it's a woman, she is linked to a marsh, and to the west, a canal ties her to Lake Hart. To the south, through more canals, Mary Jane feeds into a chain of lakes that run into Lake Kissimmee, which feeds into Lake Okeechobee. Were Lake Okeechobee not encircled by man-made dikes, the water that flows through Mary Jane would keep pouring south until it glided across the Everglades and out to sea. Do you hear the book of Ezekiel? What's the book? I'm sitting on the plane going, ha! Book of Ezekiel! And here's what happened. Some guy said, we need to protect that lake. Now, lots of things were happening with the water in Florida. So they went to Orange County. This is in Orange County, Florida. And they said, we want to stop. They were developing along Lake Mary Jane because it's going to kill that lake the way it's killed other waterways. And the Florida Chamber of Commerce said, not on our watch. And it said, your local lake could sue you, not on our watch. They're saying you can't even bring the suit. A lake is not a person. But they got together, a bunch of lawyers, and they brought a proposition before the Orange County residents. They wrote up a Bill of Rights for a river and another lake. They presented it to the commission that had been appointed to revise Orange County's charter. Remember, we're talking Florida, right? In November 2020, remember 2020, when voters went to the polls, they were asked whether of all the county's waterways, be they fresh, brackish, saline, tidal, surface, or underground, should have the right to exist, to flow, to be protected against pollution, and to maintain a healthy ecosystem. 89% voted to approve that. 89% of the voters in Orange County voted to protect their waterways the way you would protect the life of your baby. Because in some way they sense the cosmic Christ, the love of God in the water, and that it should be kept safe. And the Orlando Sentinel said that this was amazing, that it had unified voters, quote, in a state with a lousy track record for protecting natural resources. This is happening, people. This is not just, tree-hugging, bleeding heart liberals. This is everyone around the country saying, you know what? We need to turn this around. And probably the reason they did that is that the Florida Gulf Coast had a toxic algae spread the size of Connecticut, and it had caused thousands of dead fish to come up on their shores. So that made them say, gosh, I've seen the wound. I believe it. We need to resurrect these waters. Now, the good news is, of course, that resurrection is possible. But I take the water thing very seriously, and here's why. You probably heard of Flint, Michigan, the lead in the water. You may have heard of the little town in western Massachusetts. They wrote a book and made a movie called A Civil Action about, holding liable the country that had dumped toxins into the water. But what you probably haven't heard about is Sunnyvale, California, Silicon Valley, where my relatives and friends keep dying of scleroderma. So here's my mother, Ada, 1979. My aunt, Eloise, who lived 3 blocks away this way, died where did you die, Eloise? Probably 1990s. My brother died in 2001. And you're like, gosh, it must be something genetic. It's something in your family. But my next door neighbor, Mrs. Lawson, died a few years after my mother. And one of my best friends from high school, who lived 3 blocks this way, has it now. And another friend I went to high school with, she's a year younger than me, we were on high school newspaper staff, she's got it. You know how they have that phrase, there must be something in the water? Where do you think that's a phrase about toxicity in our environment. There must be something in the water. There is something in the water. because in Silicon Valley, which we call it, Philips Semiconductor and Honeywell and others in Sunnyvale and Santa Clara were building silicon chips, and it had some kind of residue on it, so they had to pass chemicals over it to wash it off, make it great for all of our iPads and computers, and it went into the groundwater of Sunnyvale and Santa Clara. So now there are cases all over of an extremely rare disease. So it has come to roost with us now. It's not just the birds and the fish who are having trouble. And of course, we have climate change, and I hope that nobody's really denying that now. But what I do want to point out to you is that in the eyes of the law of the United States, for the Supreme Court down to Orange County, Florida, people are ascribing the same respect and dignity and love and legal regard to water and birds and fish and elephants as they are to us. However, for us as Christians, we recognize that in God's eyes, they already are like people. God never said, and I made humans better than other parts of creation. God never said that birds were better than water, who were better than rocks. It just, God created all of it and said it was good. So we know we are intended to have a deep regard for creation. The problem is, it's very hard to do it. We've gotten ourselves into a situation with our fossil fuel burning cars and the plastic that wraps all of our food, and we need our computers. How would we live without computers, really? Right? So what do we do? Well, I believe in resurrection, obviously, not just in the bringing to life of one man, but resurrection throughout all of creation. We've all seen it happen in nature when a forest fire comes through an area, and 10 years later it's incredibly lush because the forest fire has created nutrition in the soil, and new fir and pine trees come up again. There's always resurrectional power in nature, but we can help it. And God did tell us to be stewards of the earth. God did tell us to see the Christ in all of creation, not just in ourselves. We can wait until it's a matter of survival for ourselves if we don't think it's survival yet. Or we can do it out of love now. Now, if you think, oh, we can't adapt, that's too hard, well, look at what we just did with COVID. Who would have thought until 2 years ago that we would all sit in our homes and not drive anywhere, not go to work physically, not buy very much, not travel, not get on a plane, because we couldn't. Because a crisis, a medical crisis, dictated that we stay home. Well, an ecological crisis, which I hope I have demonstrated is also a medical crisis, is dictating something similar, perhaps not as drastic. And I want to point out that for many of us, it has already happened. There are already workplaces where people only come in physically 2 days out of 5 days a week. Already, all the major governance committees of this church decided without any discussion, we never even talked about it, we just stayed on Zoom because we all figured out why get in the car for an hour-long meeting. That's about 40 fewer car trips per month just for our church membership alone. Imagine what would happen if that was happening everywhere. So, of course, adaptation is possible. And of course, we can do it purely out of survival. But how much more beautiful it would be, how much more a reflection of God it would be, is if we saw every piece of creation as our brother Christ, as Christ, our mother earth. How much more beautiful to do it for love. Amen.